Ready when you are.
All right. Everybody good? Cindy, you all right if we start?
Recording in progress.
All right, so welcome to the Basalt P&Z meeting for Tuesday, September 20th. Call to order.
All right. Bill Marin,
Yo.
Kyle Oberketter,
Here.
Eric Bozick,
Here.
Rob Levitt,
Yes.
and Cindy Hirschfield. Here. You have a quorum.
Excellent. So the first item tonight is a public hearing on code amendments to section 16-191 of the town code related to the town's wireless telecommunication regulations, excuse me. Jeff, I think the floor is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all again. And Jeff Conklin, town attorney. So I'm here to present an update to our wireless communication facility code. Just by way of background, in 2019, the town adopted an ordinance setting forth wireless communication facility regulations, and that was really prompted by the Federal Communication Commission, the FCC, adopting an order that preempted local regulations that materially inhibit the deployment of wireless communication facilities. And the idea was that they wanted to encourage the rollout of 5G networks. And so they tried to kind of lower some of or reduce some of the red tape in seeing that happen and put timelines, shot clocks on the processing of applications. So in response to that FCC order, Basalt and most municipalities adopted regulations that did a few different things. They defined the different types of facilities, imposed design guidelines and camouflaging requirements and height restrictions, set out application requirements and processes for or procedures for processing an application. And then there's also a separate element within the zoning code as to where different types of facilities could be located and under what type of review would be required. And one thing to just call out there is that one of the big things from the FCC order was that the town couldn't, or local governments could not preclude the deployment of certain infrastructure within rights of way. It's a use as a matter of right. Now we could impose all these different design standards to say they have to look like this, or they need to be located with spacing like that, or other things to kind of reduce some of the impact, particularly visual impact of those facilities, but they couldn't really result in a case where a carrier would be unable to deploy, or it would not be technically feasible to have a network. So that was 2019. We got that on the books. We've had been dealing with one application or a couple of applications under that code, and it's served us well in that it's been helpful for setting out what our requirements are, but then the procedures, ensuring that we have a good opportunity to review and mitigate against any potential impacts. And so far our experience with applicants, I think, has been pretty good. It's been pretty cooperative, and that's been good to see. So that was 2019, and here we are again, and to revisit these regulations, and I'm not going to go through all of the changes in great detail or go into too much more detail on as I did in 2019 when we were adopting these initially, but kind of here, as you heard earlier, for two main reasons. As soon as we got this on the books in 2019, there were changes occurring at the federal level that would affect some of our regulations, and there have continued to be changes. And so this ordinance is an effort to respond to those and incorporate them and make sure we're in step with federal regulations. And then the second reason is that over time there's just been some best practices or observing other ways communities have regulated different types of facilities and adopting some of those standards. And so a lot of what you see in the packet with the proposed ordinance is pretty technical in nature, and other elements of it are again, looking just for those best practices. So what I'll just do now is I'm gonna just highlight what those main changes are, and then if there are any questions on those, I'd be happy to attempt to answer those questions, and we can go from there. And so some of the changes were more so from the FCC level, definitional changes, new types of definitions and items like monopoles and replacement standards, defining substantive change. But then we kind of have a body of changes in the that relate to different siting. And so we've placed a greater emphasis on co-location of wireless facilities and created a priority of preference as to where facilities might be located. We also set out a section to create, to specifically protect certain locations. So not just have spacing requirements, but to say, you can't put them here unless you show to us that there's it's not technically feasible to deploy your network without putting them here. And so those protected locations are really all along downtown Midland. And then you may recall the V that came up in discussion for Basalt River Park, so trying to protect the V. And then a handful of landmark properties that we've included in the ordinance, and those being just kind of more historic properties in town. We also put in some more specific and more restrictive height restrictions in certain areas. So the maximum height of what's called an alternative tower structure. So that's a tower that looks like a light pole. Can't be higher than 16 feet on Midland, which is the height of the other poles there. In residential neighborhoods, it's the same. The idea being that it's not going to be any higher than what you're going to normally see, and ideally wouldn't know it's any different. In Willits Town Center, it's 25 feet, and that's what we are finding to work with another applicant. Other siting things, there's more specific setback requirements. And then we got into some design and location standards, setting forth some requirements on spacing, again, unless it's not technically feasible. And then I think one of the cool things that from a visual standpoint, and is that if somebody's putting up a new pole and they have kind of the thing that's projecting the signal in lay terms, what comes with it is like the suitcase, the supportive infrastructure. And it was, one of the questions was, well, is there a way to deploy that so we don't see all this stuff? And so this code creates a requirement that when you're creating a pole like that, you have an internal bay to house that equipment, and that you also create room for a second internal bay, so that in the event that another carrier comes along and wants to do the same thing, there's space for that extra stuff to be out of sight. We've also created a scenario where vaulting, so kind of creating an opportunity for some underground locations of some of these facilities, and then also putting discretion with staff as to where we'd like to, on a particular project, see, sorry to just keep using the word stuff, but to put that stuff. And so I think that is pretty good. And if it becomes an issue on some of our more protected areas, that vaulting could really be good to consolidate some of that infrastructure. We included a few other standards on camouflaging as it relates to wires and other things that are supporting the deployment, and then some specific protections for town infrastructure and landscaping. There are a few tweaks to the review procedures, again, kind of more technical in nature. And then as an accompaniment to this ordinance, we developed a master license agreement. So anytime a carrier wants to locate infrastructure in the town right of way, one of the requirements is they obtain a license agreement. So we developed a license agreement that is pretty bulked up with a lot of stuff to ensure protection of the town right of way, incorporate a lot of these code provisions, and then also set it up in a way that we don't necessarily have to start from scratch or negotiate on each one of these licenses. Once we've worked out an arrangement with a specific carrier, we can have it apply to other infrastructure that they'd put in the right-of-way in town, subject to some more specific requirements as the case may be. So those are the main changes, and I guess I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. Who starts?
This question is just my curiosity, but how do you come up with these different design guidelines? Like, how did you know what to do? Is there a place that consults on
Sure.
telecommunications design, that advises you, or?
Yeah, so we piggybacked on some work that, well, I guess let me back up and say, one, the attorney in my office that largely worked on these has a background in telecom and had kind of that more firsthand experience. Second, there are a few attorneys in Colorado that specialize on these issues with local governments, and so had, frankly, he had worked with some of our other clients, and so we had utilized some of the work that had been done with some of our other municipal clients and just using it here in Basalt. And then we, this was over last winter, had a few, more so Susan and James had some meetings and conversations with City of Aspen planning staff. They had developed kind of a whole, the way they set out their regulations is there's code provisions and then the separate design guidelines that live in a separate document outside the code. And so we looked at what might be most appropriate in Basalt and had a couple conversations with city staff, and then utilized some of those provisions. And in our discussions, we thought all that stuff would be best to be in the code kind of in one spot rather than have like a separate additional 30 pages of documents to review with pictures and so forth. So that was kind of where it came from.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. And then, yeah, you answered this a little bit, but is all this kind of in line with what the other communities in the valley
Yeah.
are requiring?
Yep.
My question is mostly of staff. Are you guys comfortable that we've gotten as far with this as we can under the existing code framework, that we're allowed to change?
Yeah, I mean, we have been processing a handful of these wireless applications, and we've gone through this with Jeff. And as you guys may know, I processed several of these applications in Aspen and went through that code as well. So we're pretty much as far as we can get with what we're allowed to regulate here.
Yeah, that was the question I was asking,
Yeah.
essentially. And my last question is, even though we have a list of exclusions for downtown, which I think is great that we can do that now, do we want to, in our design of the Midland streetscape, since we're allowed to do the vaulting component, pre-install some vaults for that sort of thing, just so we don't have to go back and do it later?
So we as on the Midland project, we've been looking at what the infrastructure can take, and if we need to actually have anything in the main 2 blocks where the historic buildings mostly are. And we think that we can locate things outside of those 2 blocks. So on the one hand, probably we don't need to do vaults in the main 2 blocks there, but we'll have infrastructure and conduit at the other ends.
Yeah, that was just, if we have an opportunity to plan, we should, it is a planning department. So
Yeah.
we should do that. That's all I got.
Kyle?
Nothing.
Rob?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about applicants, but you said there have been applicants to install something. How imminent is that?
There's been one applicant, AT&T has applied for 2 towers in the town of Basalt, 2 poles, not towers, in the town of Basalt, in Willits Town Center. So one of them's proposed to look like a light pole with kind of a tube on the top of it, and the other is proposed as just an individual pole. And so they've kind of worked with our existing standards and to get them you know, camouflaged as much as possible and to kind of fit in. You know, we have them like adding our light fixture on their pole so it matches all the rest of the light fixtures. They've met the height requirement. We had to talk them down a bit on the height requirement to meet our height requirement and to get our spacing requirements that are in the code. But they've worked with us pretty well. And then there's a third pole that's proposed in the CDOT right-of-way by the RAFTA stop, which is out of our jurisdiction.
So is that imminent work? I mean, next 6 months or?
They're still in the review process, and right now we've kind of stopped their shot clock period because we need an updated photo simulation from them. But it's still a staff level review, the way the current code is set up. So, you know, they'll probably get an approval in fairly short order. Whether they go ahead and install them, you know, we heard from the city of Aspen that there are some approvals that they've granted that, you know, are just sitting there, the telecom.
They expire?
They would. I think we have our vesting period. It would be our standard 3-year vesting period.
3 years ago, we did this, and so if nothing happens in the next 3 years, we want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, this application though has been in the iterations for 2 years probably.
Yeah, I mean, we ask them for an adjustment or more information, and then they go away for a couple months and then come back with that information.
Yeah, and it started with different locations, different heights. Originally there were 3 proposed in town. Now there's 2. So it's been I don't know if collaborative is the right word, but it's been kind of a work in progress. We're going through the application.
I have one more question. Is this pertinent to all forms of wireless communication or only 5G?
These regulations would regulate all wireless communication facilities, but then there's different categories of them, or you know, alternative tower structures, base stations, you know, different definitions that meet towers themselves, micro facilities, and what's the other one? And small cell facilities. So there's different components of wireless communication facilities.
I was just curious, because we didn't even get 4G until we were within 5 years of end of life of 4G anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was just sort of curious what they've got up their sleeve, which they probably don't even know themselves.
Yeah, and I think it seems that a lot of this technology gets rolled out in Europe far before it does in here in any event. Yeah,
It's cheaper there too.
yeah.
There's some people that are going to be vocally opposed to this. I think that someone's going to get phone calls whenever this happens.
Probably. As a follow-up to Rob, would the changes we're contemplating impact this application, or do they kind of meet these new standards we're proposing?
They, for the most part, meet these standards that we're proposing. They're within the height limit because the height limit in Willits Town Center hasn't changed. They meet the spacing requirements that are in here because those really haven't changed. You know, they're proposing to put their suitcase or the technology for it, you know, in the pole itself. So that really, you know, fits with our code limitations. So they would be consistent with our new code language too.
Great. Any other questions? If there are no more questions, this is a public hearing, so we'll open up.
Just one more.
Yeah, of course.
So if AT&T was to come through and do this, then no one else would be able to build, right? Are they basically buying the rights to like all of these jurisdictions, and if they build it, again, due to spacing, like, no one else can come through and do it, so everyone else has to rent from them?
Yeah, so I think there's a benefit to being first. There's also an expense to it, but there is the ability to require, to a certain extent, that other carriers in the future co-locate on facilities that they put in. And so, like, to the extent it's on like town-owned infrastructure, we can certainly do that. But then we can require them to co-locate on one of their poles, and they'd have to work out the terms of a license agreement. But there's a requirement that it has to be, it can't be like commercially unreasonable terms. Certainly whoever's first is going to want to recoup some costs through a licensing arrangement. But the goal is to prevent exactly what your fear is, what there be, either be a whole bunch of stuff, or that there only be one carrier in town because they're first. So that's what the thrust of some of these regulations is, to avoid those two outcomes.
So they legally have to rent it out if if Verizon comes to them?
Yeah. And again, we can't get too involved in like the private contractual relationship, but there's kind of this, I can't remember the standard in the code, but where that's also reflected in the licensing agreement, but it can't be commercially unreasonable. As part of the grant of the right to deploy this, like a pole in a town right of way, it's, we're doing this on the condition that you make this available to other users. That's just one of the conditions of approval.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So as a public hearing, we'll open this up for public comment at 6:23. Do we want to do the online ability? Reading the instructions, please.
Sure. If you are joining the P&Z meeting via Zoom or online, and you would like to make comments on this public hearing, you can call the number on your screen, which is 719-359-4580, and then enter the webinar ID, which is 876-4010-2298, and you can speak to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you, James.
So,
Don't see anybody in the room wanting to talk at this moment. Should we leave it open for another 30 seconds or a minute?
yeah, please. We have no
All right.
these online.
So we'll close the public hearing then at 6:25, and I will open it up for council questions. Rob, any questions? Any comments? Sorry.
No.
No. Kyle?
No.
Bill?
No?
Cindy?
Nope.
I have no comments. So the recommendation is to make a recommendation to pass this on to town council and approve.
I'll make a motion to recommend acceptance of this as per the staff memo.
Great. Bill,
I'll second.
Cindy seconds. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you guys.
Have a good night.
Yeah, I'll
They're quiet.
It's bring your kids to work evening for me, and so I'll trot them through here on the way out. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Next item up is a Eagle County referral in regards to special use permit application on Fender Lane. We'll open up for a staff presentation.
Thank you. And we have Doug Pratt with us this evening, representing the applicant. Doug, if you'd like to come up to the table, so your comments can be on the mic there. So yes, we have a Eagle County referral this evening on an application called Twin Acres Ranch. Let me share my screen here real quickly. So the property subject to this Eagle County referral is a 100-acre property in Missouri Heights, which is off of Fender Lane, and it's near the edge of the Basalt 3-mile planning area. 80 of the 100-acre ranch is under a conservation easement with Aspen Valley Land Trust. And on the property, the applicant is proposing to construct a 25-stall boarding stable, as well as a 100-foot by 200-foot covered riding stable. The application lists that there would be between 3 and 4 employees generated, and it would be open for riding lessons, horse training, as well as horse boarding. The application also identifies that there would likely be hosting horse shows and identifies location for parking. And let me back out here so you can see the proposed concept. So once again, it would be a proposed horse arena. There would be stables, as well as an ADU potentially in the future, and a single-family house. And as I noted, it's a 100-acre property, 80 of which are under conservation easement. Staff has provided a draft letter in your packet materials, and I'll briefly go over that letter. Let me make it larger so you can see it. Basically, the letter identifies that the property is within the town's 3-mile planning area and outside the town's urban growth boundary. It also includes a statement that has been included in quite a few other Missouri Height referrals that the town has provided, which it encourages Eagle County to take traffic generation and maintaining the rural character of the town's buffer around Basalt in mind when they're reviewing an application in this application. Staff has also provided potential additional language that you could add if you believe that the proposal is a good example of maintaining rural character and a rural use in the area that's a buffer around Basalt. And so that language you have at your table, and I've also got it up here on the screen. I believe the applicant, Doug Pratt, has some comments related to this being consistent. Staff would suggest this evening hearing comments from the applicant's representative and then providing commission discussion. Ultimately, P&Z could either transmit the letter as it's drafted, you could amend the letter and then direct staff to transmit it, or you could come up with additional provisions if you'd like. With that, staff would suggest hearing from Doug.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Doug Pratt. I am a planner with Lion Studio, and I've been working with Whiskey Mountain Estates, who is Jess Graber and Annie Graber's daughter, who is proposing to run the equestrian facility that we're seeking approval for. Yeah, just as a little bit of an advocate for the project and also to answer questions that you may have regarding the project, but it is a 100-acre property that'll be limited, no future subdivision via the conservation easement that's on it. Single-family residence, potential for a future ADU, but that would be pending application and special use approval in the zone district, or maybe to limited impact. It will require approval. And then the boarding stable, 25-stall boarding stable, there is a 9-stall boarding stable already there. It has been operating as an equestrian facility, and the riding arena. And James, if you don't mind going back to the graphic, just the site plan that you last had up. Any one of them will do. But I just wanted to point out too that the area where the proposed covered arena is actually already a riding arena. It's an outdoor arena. So I'm not an equestrian guy, so I don't know if arena is the right word, but they use it for all of their outdoor events. There's also another arena that's up top, the road that heads north. There's another arena up there. Just to let you know, it operates with a 9-stall stable and 2 outdoor riding arenas right now. So it is an equestrian facility. I found some renderings from George N. Wagaman back to 1981 when all of this was being proposed that show this as an equestrian facility. So it's been around for a while. And then I guess a little bit of just an observation for you is I know a lot of times that referral agencies, like in the case of Basalt, may stay a little bit more neutral unless there's some opposition that these aren't meeting standards. But I guess truly, if you feel like this is kind of, single-family residence ADU and equestrian facility on 100 acres meets some of your standards for rural character, it's a limited development project that you might support it as such in your letter to Eagle County. So it's just a request. I'm fine to answer questions, and we've worked, Aspen Valley Land Trust has been out to the property numerous times. Jess Graber has owned it he started working with me about 18 months ago, so maybe for a couple of years. He's been treating thistle, and he irrigated all summer this summer, so the ranch is looking better. This equestrian facility will also provide some resources to help take care of the 80 acres of conserved area. It does take economic resources to do that, so having this as part of the overall plan for the ranch, I think, will help the conservation easement as well. So it's a little long-winded, but just wanted to lay that out for you.
Thank you. Rob, any questions?
Is that last part, Doug, stipulated anywhere?
What's that?
You said that the project would generate revenue to take care of the 80 acres.
Well, he is obligated to take care of the 80 acres, and so at this point...
That's part of the easement?
Well, because he'll utilize that pasture for his boarded horses. So yes, right now he haze it, and he will use the pasture for some of the boarded animals. There will also be, besides the indoor boarding at the 25 stall boarding stable and the 9-stall boarding stable, he'll have animals outside as well. So it's an observation that it will take some economy to run the ranch. The conservation easement is part of the ranch, and this will help maintain those areas.
Is this questions for staff as well?
Sure.
Okay, but back to conservation easement.
Sure.
Anything that's being proposed here is all within approved of that easement?
It is. So the conservation easements don't give you the right to do something. They reserve you the right to do that pending approvals.
But they...
So there is the ability in the conservation easement to have an equestrian facility, to have a covered indoor equestrian facility, to have stables and boarded horses. We met with Bud, and you guys probably know his last name better than I, at AVLT because it's all consonants. But we met with Bud out on site, and he supported the efforts to do this, and in turn, I think he wasn't referred the application as the conservation easement holder, so from Eagle County. So I sent it to him and just said, just for your, just so you know, this is what's being proposed. We've met with him. He knows from early on what we were proposing, but he has the application and will be commenting on it from AVLT's standpoint.
I would think a letter from them supporting it would be helpful.
Right.
But this is now a commercial enterprise that they're proposing.
Right.
And is that permitted under their AR zoning?
It's a special use, which is the type of the application.
It is.
So it's permitted if it gets...
It needs a special use permit.
It's-
That's what we're doing here tonight.
Right.
It's similar to the town's special review uses where you look at operations to make sure it's not too significantly impacting stuff.
I was surprised there's no letters from neighbors in the packet.
But Rob, we're not approving, we're making a letter of recommendation, this is Eagle County approves.
So it's a referral, yeah.
It's a letter
I
of
guess I'm curious if there's been any opposition from the neighbors.
Well,
Yeah,
if you would,
that's a different question, yeah.
Well, usually they're in our packet, so...
right. If you would like to observe the Keep Missouri Heights Rural website, they have it on their website. It's actually a pretty good presentation. It's not, I mean, I looked at it, it's not very biased. They're taking comments. I didn't have access to their comments. So, but if you'd like to, for your own information, take a look at that website. It is up And it's kind of hosted by the neighborhood.
I mean, sort of surprises there's no one here or we haven't heard from them.
Well, actually, because we're a referral, it's not a
Public
notice
hearing.
public hearing. Yeah, so most of the comments you're gonna get from the public are gonna be at the Eagle County level.
Okay, and does our letter go through town council or not?
No, it's a P and Z letter.
That's all, thanks. Thanks.
Kyle?
No questions.
Doug, does, that proposed article number 3, is that in any way inconsistent with what you're proposing in your application?
I'm sorry, article number.
About the ADU and the,
This
Probably doesn't have
Here.
that.
the language.
No, I think James and I were kind of corresponding via email a little bit, and I think this kind of represents what we were talking about, and that is, as it says, 100-acre ranch, 80 acres of which is conserved, single-family residence, potential ADU pending future approvals, riding arena, boarding stables, and again, consistent with the rural character of the area. You know, and it is 1 unit per 100 acres, you know, and it's actually zoned AR, which is 1 unit per 10 acres in Eagle County. So, I mean, it's well below. And they couldn't do that because there's an easement on it, but just to let you know, that is what the existing zoning is there, so.
It's consistent with what the underlying zoning would have been without the,
Right, and the zoning is still there, it's just that, you know, there's not, it's not like a threat or something, it's just the underlying zoning is AR, which is 1 unit per 10 acres, and this, you know, build out is the riding arena, riding stables, and single-family residence, so basically 1 single-family residence and ADU per 100 acres for the residential component.
so your people will have no objection to that article?
To this
That-
piece?
yeah, that-
No, that's, we support that, yes.
Okay, good.
Thanks. Guess that was the easy answer.
That was the short way around.
I had to look though, I had to read it one more time for myself, sorry.
all good. Cindy, questions?
So is the is the conservation easement, is it already there? Did it come with the property, or is it
I
being
think
established
It
now?
was done in 1998.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
So it has been there for quite a while, yes, and came with the property when Whiskey Mountain LLC bought it.
That's my only question. I
Alright.
was just curious.
I don't have any questions. Not a public hearing, correct?
Not a public hearing.
So at this point, are there any comments, any thoughts on this? Rob, yeah?
Yeah, I'm not at all opposed to this, but I'm wondering if, as a commercial, it's gonna be some backlash of traffic and all that other stuff. And I'm sure Eagle County will discuss that. But I thought that referral letter is, I mean, may as well just send this. It's basically a blank piece of paper, and do we want to actually make comments for or against? You know, do we feel strongly about it anyway, that it's something that we want to get behind and support, or that we have reservations about, and should we point those out to Eagle County?
I agree the letter's a little generic, but, I mean, it does talk about, you know, we want you to look at traffic, I mean, we're pointing out the things we want them to look at.
Right, the same paragraph we send to them every time.
Yeah. You're right, does it have impact? I don't know.
I mean, it's partly about this application, obviously, but it's also a little bit more of a broad question. Do we want our referral letters to Eagle County to say anything?
I think it reminds them we're still here. And I think there's a certain amount of utility to that we're paying attention.
Yeah.
I would agree a little bit with Rob, though. They seem to know we're here and ignore us every single time.
I mean, honestly, if we decide that we want to support this, to write a letter in favor of something would be a pleasant shift from what we normally send over there, right? Basalt against growth again, Basalt against growth again, you know, is what I feel like. And if we, as a group, support this, I feel like the discussion should be, do we want to say that?
Well, I think we could magnify that Article 2, if we choose to say that it's creating a commercial endeavor that's consistent with the agricultural nature of the neighborhood.
I'm sorry, that is con or in-con?
Concurrent with the agricultural neighborhood around there, you know, it kind of, it promotes an agricultural business. You know, they buy hay, they board horses, they run tractors, you know, it makes it look like what the people who buy second homes up there are expecting to have. There's people in cowboy hats on horses with saddles.
I mean, you guys, you know.
I'd be
if you
will,
don't agree
I
with
think
me,
it
that's fine
seems,
too.
I think it seems like this is what should be up there, so, I mean, I'd be willing to endorse a
And then,
more strongly worded letter in favor of it.
looks like, yeah, so that's two questions. Where do we stand on this application, and do we feel like we would like our referral letter to
Well,
have more?
I want to be careful. We're not the entity, and I would like to see more on traffic concerns before I would approve this. In
Okay.
theory, yes, I totally agree with what we're saying and what people are saying, but I wouldn't go so far as saying we approve this.
Great, fine, and I'm the same, but
Yeah.
then maybe we say we would like to see that the traffic stuff, you know, who we want our letter to have more teeth is the other half of that question, comment.
I think we're just giving them more to ignore. So
I don't know, it's not up to me, it's up to us, and I think it's,
I think the comments, including Article number 3, are perfectly fine and consistent with, it's consistent with what we've always done, but it's like saying, you know, we don't object to this. So I think it's a reasonable thing to say.
I think it's also just a matter of putting something on the record, you know, that if we didn't say, have an opinion one way or the other, send a letter one way or the other, then in discussion, you know, people could say, oh, well, it's within the master plan, where does Basalt P and Z fall on this? Now they'd know.
I feel like we should support the things we support, and we should fight the things that we fight, instead of just saying, yes, we recognize this is a thing.
But I understand what Eric is saying, that that's not our, it's not like our jurisdiction in this case, you know?
Well, I mean, we can say anything we want, it's our referral letter.
Yeah.
I mean, if we wanted to get into traffic studies and things before we're ready to recommend it, I totally understand that.
No, I'm not saying we have to have a hearing and know all this stuff. That's not my point being is, I tend to agree with you, like, it would be nice to have a little bit more teeth behind what we're saying, but they ignore us, but we're not the entity having the hearings to hear all this stuff.
Is there a reason that we shouldn't
You can,
have an opinion?
you can certainly strengthen any of your concerns. We can write them stronger. I think the fine line that this board needs to be aware of is you don't want to be advocating for an application. So you can support it and say this seems to meet our community standards or our goals or what we're doing in Basalt, but you don't want to be confused with advocating for a project. So I think that's why,
Is that illegal?
yes.
Okay.
So that's why I think some of
You're
these
advocating
letters.
by saying it follows the rules that we set place in. That's your way of advocating.
Well, so the direction of the Planning and Zoning Commission is your job is to make sure that it meets the land use code. It's not really your job to institute your opinion. And because we don't run the Eagle County Land Use Code, we get to make referrals on it, on how it relates to our planning area. And that's why these feel a little bit wishy-washy. So unless we have a strong opposition to something, that's why these tend to feel a little bit lighter in
That's
opinion.
helpful. I mean,
Yeah,
I would say the other aspect to the referral review that we as the town do, you know, we have a very limited time to do analysis on their referral applications, and so, you know, you don't get a full analysis of what the impacts of the project are. You know, we do our cursory review and try to, you know, take a temperature of whether it's gonna be seriously impactful or whether it's gonna fit and be generally consistent with the character. But we don't have the ability to go into significant depth on our review in the very limited amount of time that we get from Eagle County.
That being said, on other applications, as we're aware, we've written stronger letters
on occasion.
where there are.
You want to save those for the things when you
Right.
think you need them.
Right.
I don't disagree with that either.
So we're back to, do we want to tweak the letter, or do we want to approve the letter? We could take a motion and take a vote, we could,
I'm perfectly happy with the letter as it stands with Article 3 in it.
With Article 3?
Yeah.
I would second that.
so we have a first and a second,
I agree.
all right?
Does that
so
become a motion?
Sounds like that was a motion?
Yeah, that's a motion.
All right,
Right.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I can go with that, I'm in.
5-0.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
good luck.
And we'll,
Thank you, Doug.
if you want to learn more, you feel free to come join us in Eagle County.
Appreciate that.
Thanks for your
Yeah,
attention to
but
this.
don't sit
we
next to him.
As we segue, Rob, I appreciate that, because I mean, it is a good point, you know, we refer things over them a lot, and it does feel like they're ignored, but, you know, we should say,
Well,
yeah,
it's just balance, right? We want to save the bullets for when we need them, but we also, I think if we,
Yeah,
This was definitely on the nerf side of bullets.
yes.
Let's just leave it that way.
Although I'm
The
sure
pointed ones when it
somebody up there
matters.
is going to be upset about it.
yeah, no, definitely. Excellent, next item, work plan, should we stay in session for the work plan?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm assuming staff directed, staff led?
Well, yes.
Excellent.
So, as we talk about items for the P and Z to consider for the 2023 work plan, I wanted to give you a brief summary of what some of the other citizen boards are doing. And so there are, what I will tell you before I start going through these couple of slides really quickly, there's some consistent themes through each of the other boards so far, which include participating in the Midland Avenue streetscape in some fashion, as well as the Willits Lane corridor plan. So we'll talk about those a little bit more. Start with the green team slide of what their work plan is looking like. If you want to throw those up, you can. So they're looking at tracking the greenhouse gas emissions, which is something they've consistently done, but we're just always looking to improve the way those are tracked and measure what we're doing on against that. Their kind of priorities fall into three categories: tracking goals, public education, transportation, and built environment. And so some things you guys will see is things about the built environment as you see code changes come along. In particular, you probably know that they're working on updating the sustainable building regulations, which is going big.
You just broke it, James. You just, oh no.
Well, that's how some people
Oh, you
feel about the
saved it.
sustainable building regulations, so that's appropriate.
I think I've
Uh-huh.
seen that
That's pretty
actually
good.
happen.
That's right on.
Through the vortex.
Other things the green team is working on are transportation alternatives. They continually fund the WeCycle program, Basalt Connect, and car charging stations. Something we're looking at for 2023 is improving our bike infrastructure and putting bike charging stations, mechanic stations, all of that, and considering where those will be located within the Midland and the Willits Lane corridors, as well as throughout town. And then just doing a bigger public education campaign. This particular site is a little bit outdated from when I met with Green Team last, but these are generally where they're going. There's a lot of momentum to figure out how to increase alternative transportation. So that'll be coming down the road from the Green Team as well.
Can I ask about Basalt Connect? Did we get another vehicle or just downgrade from the van?
The van is in repair,
Ah,
and so we have a loaner right now. Yes.
I thought I saw the van today.
There are
Okay.
two vans, and one of the vans is in repair.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep, which, speaking of which, the Green Team, after the solar project is constructed and we have another ramp up of cash, they would like to consider buying electric vans down the road.
when's the police department getting Teslas?
Yeah, that'll be on there too. or really fast e-bikes.
Buses for the school district, that'd be a fun partnership.
That would be something. That's a good idea. Switching on to Bpac, the Basalt Public Arts Commission. They actually meet this Thursday, so this is truly just discussion items for them. But they're looking at programming activities for the Basalt River Park as part of the goal to keep economic activity happening in historic downtown area while we're under construction. Of course, the Midland Avenue streetscape is going to have lots of opportunities for art installations and rotations through there. Figuring out what we can do to add or improve some of the existing and maybe new art installations over in Willets Lane. River Park and basalt sculptures, murals, all of these other things. So they're really going to kind of dial that in a little bit more when they meet on Thursday. But just kind of circling back again to that Midland Avenue and Willets Lane, those pieces. And then lastly, this printed a little bit funny. Post Parks, Open Space and Trails Committee, kind of a lot of the things you would expect them to be working on: improvements to Albany Park, improvements to DeRocks Park, improvements to the skate park, and those sorts of things. Some trails improvements, one of which they were really excited about is improving the connection over at 7-Eleven to the school campus. We have no idea what that looks like right now, but clearly there's a need. Swinging Bridge, and what got cut off here in this graphic was, again, the Willets Lane master plan and figuring out connectivity, trails, improvements there, and the Midland Avenue streetscape project. So that's just kind of a really big overview of what the other boards are doing. And then we welcome your ideas on what you'd like to do or questions about those going forward.
Well, first off, I think master plan implementation should be on there because we just did that. We don't want to forget that we just did it. I think we put a lot of work into it, so you don't want to like, because previously with our master plans, once you do that, it's like, oh, that's all done, and no one mentions it again for the next 10 years, other than when applications come through. And I think we should, on these sort of documents, not let it fall through those kind of flowchart cracks. That's one thing.
I would tie in with that is, I know you mentioned the solar project, and we're Midland, obviously, but also the affordable housing. So just the 3 projects with the bond initiative.
And I also think, this is a little nuts and bolts for us, but I think it's really important, is that we should kind of pay attention to the accessibility of this building itself before somebody sues us. Because that could really, really happen, because there's not one single part of it that is. So I think we should not forget about that.
For me, just piggybacking on what we were talking about before, we've had very preliminary and introductory conversations with our sister organizations in the Valley and other planning departments, and I think that's an important conversation to continue, especially as within the town boundaries, we're almost at build-out. But we're being touched by all these projects on the periphery of us, and, if we're just milquetoast and we can't have anything that they listen to, that's kind of a bad position for us to be in.
I think Eric has a very good point, especially since both Susan and Cindy Hubin have retired. That was a conduit for getting the 2 boards together, which we did for like the very first time a couple years ago. And I think we should do that on a regular basis.
I stopped short in my presentation here, so I might just backpedal a hot second. Some of these P&Z Commission work plan ideas are from you, particularly down in the left-hand corner, the code amendments. over the last year or so, we've talked about discussions about minimum parking requirements. And that has recently come up as well with the sustainable building regulations and replacing some of those parking spaces with EV stations. Historically, the EV parking spaces were in addition to required parking, so whether we want to just amend that so it's very clear that it's part of and not additional. Looking at further studying our housing mitigation requirements. Are they accurate? Are they enough? Do we want to do more? Do we want to make certain things more flexible along those lines? You will also be seeing the housing guidelines come back to you at some point in the near future, as those need to be amended as well.
I'm sorry, which guidelines?
The housing guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, all of this talk about the categories and the income restrictions and whatnot, so.
Can I ask about just those code amendments and
Yeah.
kind of the steps that goes through? Is that a discussion we have together, then you guys go and write them, or you guys write them and then come to us and then we have that discussion? Or what does that process look like?
So typically we would, and James will fill in here a little bit too. He's like, wow, go girl. We'll get your discussion items and your issues, and then we'll bring to you how that compares to what exists in the code. And then we can come back and bring alternatives on what you could adopt or what options. So if you wanted to do something really progressive, something you wanted a moderate progressive or a no change option, and come back, and then you guys would have discussion about what you would recommend for moving forward.
And do you try to just take like one or two of those per year to work on? Because I know it's a big process to go through that, or is it?
Well, you know, I think at this stage, we have 3 listed on here, and we would have to see how in-depth we want to go on any of them to be realistic, but I think 3 seems possible.
And it really kind of depends on how much development review we have going on as well. You know, if we don't have a lot of development review going on, we try to fit other code amendments in as we can make it work. Because we have a whole list of cleanups that need to be done as well, and we try to hit those, you know, whenever we can. Like the tree amendments that you just saw as an example of that.
Yep. So some other things on here as far as projects, you might have caught the south side secondary access alternatives to be studied as well. That's a real thing. And then.
In that vein, and maybe that could be commissioner comments, do you know when they're connecting South Side to Stotts Mill, when that's gonna open up? Or not till next year at some point?
It will probably be at the end of this year when the first multifamily buildings are going to be ready for occupancy. Could be early next year if they get delayed, but right now.
But within 6 months to a year?
Yeah, definitely.
I thought that connection wasn't opening up.
No, well, wait a
Where
minute.
Allison Lane goes straight up?
You're
That's-
talking about Allison Lane
Yeah.
connection?
Yeah.
That's not vehicular access.
Oh, okay, just-
Yeah, that's
It's
what
an
I thought.
emergency access, it's
Gotcha.
pedestrian trail.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough, I'd forgotten that.
Good catch. I thought you were talking about connecting Stotts Mill access and
No,
opening
but
it up
that,
for
it's
public
a
on the south side.
question for later, but sir.
Just wishful thinking on your part.
No, I don't want that open.
Oh, you don't want it
No,
open?
because the neighborhood, all the high school kids will be zipping through there. It'll be a nightmare. Doesn't impact me where I live, but Cindy and a bunch of others would totally be impacted if that was open.
It wouldn't really impact me either.
Probably not a
Is it
lot, but a little
down?
bit, a little bit, yeah. Sorry, sidetracked us, sorry about that.
It's okay, so we're open to taking your ideas and your concerns and those sorts of things to,
So would you be open to having some projects be co-located between different boards? the same project, just to sort of reinforce them? Like say, you know, non-vehicular transportation modes and things like that. Because for us, it's not so much about the trails per se as it is about the urban design of that sort of thing, because we have an interest in that part.
Yes, in fact, that's one of my goals of all of the boards having similar work plans, is that we'll be able to collaborate and get more of a holistic design for everything, instead of having these kind of isolated, siloed projects that are only green team or that are only Bpac, that everybody's combined in together. Mhm. It's a tricky one for you guys. The other groups, it's pretty clear because they have their things, and it's
Yeah.
a funny thing to ask a planning and zoning commission, what do you want to do to the land use code, or,
Do you want comments right now, or?
Yeah.
No. I would love to see a study or work on something about if the RETAs work for affordable housing, if just taking what we do with this money, and obviously everyone opts for it because it's less work and just kicks the can down the road. And do we maybe think about eliminating that?
Well, and just to comment on that, we have eliminated the RETA as a mitigation standard. And now we just kind of negotiate through specific development approvals, the ability to get RETAs. But absolutely studying, whether it works or not.
So the RETA doesn't reduce anything? It's not this or that, it's just in addition to everything?
In addition, we negotiate a RETA, yeah.
Okay, I don't think I totally comprehended that then. Well, then you just cross it off the list then, if it's money we're getting, okay.
Well, it's still interesting to find out if it actually works.
Right, that's
It's going
in
toward-
essence, what's the balance of that? What do we, again, we're almost out of land, so like, what can we even do with this?
Sure.
Right.
Is that enough
It's fine, yeah.
direction, guidance?
If nothing's burning a hole in your pocket that you need us to follow up on right now, we will have plenty of things coming back your way from the other board, so.
I throw one thing out there, it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily need its own little color blurb on the screen, but we're still 2 commissioners short, right? Get that somehow in the
Is
front
Gino
there?
Well, is Gino
officially-
with us still or not?
Nope, he's officially resigned.
Okay.
We are advertising and we are moving out there. Feel free to refer your friends, your neighbors.
Did it go out to the Spanish? We were talked about in some of the Spanish
Did,
media.
yep. Yep.
We need it.
Well,
Diversity voices are good.
Re-advertising in like non-boomer places as well.
We're doing a ton of advertising in non-boomer places, a
That's
lot of
good.
social media.
Because usually we just put it in the newspaper and, then you're only gonna
Yeah.
get people over
we
50.
can do it on the Facebook too.
The Facebook.
Have we just like reached
Head up,
out to
please.
past
Yeah, so
applicants?
people like your mom and my mom can
Specifically?
apply.
Yeah, yep.
Boomers.
Can we offer a signing bonus?
An extra sandwich at dinner.
Extra pool pass next summer.
These are things. All right.
I would, this is perhaps beyond the scope of everything, and it might, I don't know where, like the Affordable Housing Committee stands on this, but I wish we could get some kind of solid numbers on, how many people need housing and what type of housing. Because I feel like we just guess, everything's based on hypotheticals. We don't really have a solid understanding of, who's looking, what, are they families, single people, young people, old people, what kind of income category, it's just based on trying to guess.
And something Rob's brought up in the past, how many work here? You know, that whole breakdown of, are they working, are they second homes? You know, because that's such an important part of this discussion. When we talk about affordable housing, I
Yeah.
think it's started to change the last 6 months to a year of like, who are we giving housing for?
Where they're working.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, as an example, you know, Stotts Mill, that was sold as attainable housing. I mean, I look at the sales rolls regularly on that, and I would say
Yeah.
a good third of the people buying lots there for houses are from out of town.
What's the lot price?
They're flipping now for up to 700,000.
Up to that high now?
You're looking at $2 million for the house.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Your attainable housing program.
So there's no
The housing, there's
restriction.
difference between the housing and the affordable, but I'm not trying to split hairs, but I agree with you. I feel like we got sold a bag of goods on
Yeah.
that one too.
But I mean, that's just kind of, you know, the thing, like, it's not serving what we thought it was gonna serve, and it's, you know, totally different when people come and buy second homes there rather than,
There's
so.
also the question of, like, one thing APCHA is struggling with right now is people retiring into affordable housing. Because that really wasn't what it was meant for, but that is happening.
Right,
You know, because, you know, they've been in them so long that their accumulated deed restrict allowed sales prices above the, you know, the maximums for the category. So does that have to get bought down by somebody? You know, if someone retires out of affordable housing and they've owned it for, say, 30 years, and they get to appreciate it 2% per year, does it then go, the price that they're allowed to sell it for, go outside of the guidelines for affordable housing? And then what happens with that?
Luckily, we don't have too much of that
I
problem.
was gonna say, do
because-
we have it?
yeah, I don't
We
think we have that
we
too
will
much
have
here.
it, Picken County has it now.
Well, the vast majority of our units are actually rental, so.
Oh, okay, so they're not for
Yeah.
sale, so, yeah.
But, you know, in the limited for sale units, most of our deed restrictions are built in such that there's a certain appreciation cap and they don't go outside the,
It doesn't go outside of the maximum
yeah,
amount.
yeah.
But also, you know, even for the rental units, say, so if someone retires, do we kick them out?
Our guidelines, we changed them a couple years back, to require a certain amount of volunteer time if they're retiring and trying to requalify. That was kind of our way of a soft landing, I guess you would say.
Do we even know what land is still even, has the ability to be developed? Anything over 5 acres that doesn't have an easement or, like, is that known?
It was part of the master planning process.
Well,
There was parcels pointed out,
Right.
but
Those
Are there-
parcels
are
were
there-
pretty much it though.
are there additional ranches that could be sold and subdivided? Or are most of them?
Well, there's definitely parcels in unincorporated Eagle County and Picken County that could be subdivided. And majority of them are outside of our urban growth boundary as the town. You know, we have a good sense for what is in the town's urban growth boundary and what can be developed and kind of what the issues are with those parcels like South Side and the transportation access out of there.
I'm assuming we'll have a referral on the Forest Service property.
If
It's
and
been in the
when,
news. What's that?
if and when.
Well, it's in the news again, so.
But, you know, I would say all those properties out in Eagle County and Picken County, we don't necessarily know what their subdivision potential is.
If some of you remember, you may not, the master plan before this one, we had, the P and Z was talking about using the urban growth boundary as a tool to generate affordable housing, as being flexible, causing the master plan not to be accepted by the town council. It was a big deal at the time.
How was that supposed to work?
We would use the urban growth boundary as a tool to bring parcels for affordable housing into the urban growth boundary.
So you would expand the boundary. to
Expand the
incorporate
boundary, yeah.
certain-
And the council said, no, that will not happen. We do not want to sign this master plan. They didn't sign the master plan, and they came up with their own master plan that it obviated that one part. And so we didn't even go there this time. But, you know, that was, I thought at the time, a fairly powerful tool, though it became unspeakable to do that. So keep in mind that's been discussed before, and that is a very hot button to some people.
Thank you.
No more thoughts on this or ideas? Commissioner comments, staff updates?
You guys want to start? You have nothing?
We have an update on the river park?
Yeah, the River Park, we've made significant progress. The sod was laid last week. We are looking to get the bandshell foundation poured before winter sets in here. And then likely the rest of the shell for the bandshell will be added early spring. We are getting bids back in on a rebid on the bus shelter and the restroom facility. We previously put it out to bid and got one bid, and it was way too high. And so we've kind of done some work to work on drumming up some more contractors that might be potentially interested. And so we're getting a rebid. They should be in by the end of the week, so hopefully we'll be able to move forward on that piece as well. The remaining portion of the landscaping is going in on the west side of the park over the next couple of weeks here. So it's starting to really take shape.
That's a good one. We'll have an update on the Midland Streetscape project for you as we get a little closer to 30% design, probably the end of October. So we'll be back with that. Sunday market is coming to a near end soon, so want to get in there another
What's
time.
the last date?
I think it's this weekend.
Oh, really?
And that's pretty much what's happening. It's budget season, so we're busy with heads down.
Is the leaf collection scheduled? I don't need dates, but I'm assuming does it run like clockwork at this point?
Pretty close. I don't have the schedule for that. I'll have to check in.
No worries, just checking.
Yeah, good point.
Any update on, you mentioned, so the streetscape, any further movement on the solar project?
The solar project is it's moving towards 30% design, so that we can get a construction bid on that as well. So yeah, that's cooking right along.
We decided on I heard mixed things on which school it is, maybe all schools. Do we know that yet, or?
Yeah, so there's a solar array on the ground in front of the high school.
Okay.
And we can have a formal update on this at some point in time.
Sure.
There is an array on the concession stand at the high school, rooftop array at the elementary school, rooftop array at the school bus station in Elgibel. And
That's the full list
That's
right
it.
there. Yeah.
That's great. Spreading it around, that's awesome.
We're also out for a DOLA grant at the moment to hopefully get matching funding for.
So really that's cool.
Does that include batteries? With storage?
no batteries.
Oh.
No storage?
No storage. The team went through an exercise to see if it made sense to have batteries. The only location that's large enough to host the batteries is at the high school. But the cost of the batteries is $1 million, and they have a lifetime of 10 years, so by the time it ruins the payback. And the thought was that technology is changing so much that probably in even 3 years, the batteries will be cheaper and smaller, so council decided to wait on that.
It's really hard to use the batteries on commercials installations anyway, because the batteries are all single phase and all commercial is 3-phase. And the Holy Cross infrastructure doesn't play well with phase changes.
Right.
I've been through this.
CMC seemed to figure it out.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing you have to go through, that you throw money at it.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question on what's happening in Holland Hills in 82. Is that going to be the distillery that was passed by Pitkin, and that's what the earth moving is?
Yeah, and,
Okay.
yeah, we made a recommendation on that.
A while ago.
That was a
And then I
couple years
heard
ago.
that maybe it had died, but
2 or 3, yeah.
I saw them moving earth. Okay. Good.
I saw that too.
Anything on the fields? Is that just still?
It's,
October 11th is when it was rescheduled for. Not sure if it's actually going to happen then or not, but we can try to give you any updates that we get. You know, it was continued because the county commissioners were looking for additional community benefit in their conversations, and so the applicant went back to study that, I guess.
No more comments or questions? We're at that time.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Cindy second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned at 7:18.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.